Hey, what's up? I'm Coach Dan Blewett. In today's video, let's talk about the strike zone in baseball. Let's go over the basics, how the strike zone works, the size of the strike zone, the expansion of the strike zone, why we use margin for error as a good way of deciding what pitch to throw based on the count, how to chop up the plate, how pros do it, how amateurs kind of screw it up, and more here in today's video about the strike zone and counts. All right, so if you're new here, I'm Coach Dan. I'm a former pro baseball player. You can look me up. I have 3 books about baseball. And if you're looking to learn more about the game, I highly recommend you pick up a copy. So in today's video, let's talk about the strike zone and how we chop up the plate, how we can understand the strike zone, and how margin for error helps us decide what pitch to throw next. Now, the reason pitchers get hit hard is when they throw too many pitches in the center cut portion of the plate, right? So we know that throwing the ball down the middle of the plate is bad for pitchers and it's good for hitters. Throwing the ball on the corners of the plate and on the edges of the strike zone, whether it's the bottom border or the very top border, is much harder for the hitter to make solid contact on the barrel of the bat. So at a basic level, one of the fundamentals of good pitching, besides changing timing and throwing balls that break and all those different things that make it difficult to hit the ball square, is just to get your strikes by throwing on the edges of the plate, right? It's going to be harder for the hitter to barrel up and hit the ball hard. Now, the problem with that, and this is why pitchers use margin for error, and this is one of my big gripes with amateur baseball, is that we have to use a balance of margin for error to make sure that we can be ahead in the count versus falling behind in the count. Now, falling behind in the count is bad because when a pitcher is closer to walking a hitter, say it's a 2-0 count, meaning 2 balls and no strikes, or a 3-1 count, 3 balls and 1 strike, that pitcher does not want to give a free pass to the hitter. That's one of the worst things a pitcher can do because they didn't have to earn their way on base. And when hitters hit the ball in play, even when they don't hit that hard, they still get out, right? Even if they hit it very hard, they still get out. So a pitcher forcing the hitter to put the ball in play is a very important thing he can do. Walking them and giving them first base for free is very bad. So pitchers don't want to walk hitters, okay? The problem is and this is what makes pitching so tough, is throwing to the corners of the plate makes it much more likely that you're going to miss outside of the strike zone and thus fall behind the count and thus either walk more hitters or have to bring the ball back over the middle of the plate to catch up on strikes. So what pitching ends up becoming is a balancing act of throwing to the corners where you have lesser margin for error, which I'll explain in a second, and throwing to the middle of the plate where you have more margin for error so you can get ahead earlier. So here's the analogy. If you had an open goal in hockey or in soccer, and you're right there, all you have to do is kick it in the goal, where would you aim? You would aim in the dead center of that soccer goal or that hockey goal, right? Because that gives you the most margin for error, where if you mishit it, you still have a couple feet to the right, a couple feet to the left, a couple feet up and down to still do the job, which was kick it in that open goal, right? Or hit it with your hockey stick. It's the same thing in pitching. If I aim down the middle, I can miss a couple inches this way, this way, this way, and this way, and still throw a called strike. So when a pitcher really wants to throw a strike, it makes sense to aim down the middle of the plate, not because he wants to throw it there, but because if he aims there and misses, it gives him the most chance of still throwing a strike even though he didn't hit his spot exactly. So the goal of throwing or aiming down the middle is never to throw it exactly down the middle. It's just to say, hey, this is our aim. So now if you're not perfect, which no one is, now you're going to miss and still be in the strike zone. So that is a tactic that makes sense when you're behind in the count and you need to catch up because it gives you a higher likelihood of throwing a strike, or early in the count when you want to get ahead of the hitter. Now, when a pitcher gets ahead and say the pitcher is 0-1 or 1-2 or 0-2, now it doesn't make sense to aim down the middle as much because we're not as worried about throwing strikes. And our main worry at that point is throwing a quality pitch that's hard for the hitter to hit. So now we might aim for the corner or the third or the half, which I'll get into in a second. And that's going to give us less margin for error because if we still miss with the same relative grouping, half our misses are now going to be off the plate and half our misses are going to be on the plate. Whereas if we aim down the middle, a lot more of our misses will be on the plate. So aiming to the corner gives us less margin for error because about half or more of our misses are going to be balls. So this is why when we have more strikes as a pitcher and we're ahead, we can start to aim further off the plate and still be safe because we have enough likelihood of throwing a strike, but a high likelihood of throwing a quality strike. Whereas earlier, we'll aim down the middle more often to give us a higher likelihood of any strike, but also a less likelihood of a quality strike. So that's an important distinction, and that's a fundamental understanding that all pitchers need to know, because again, the goal of throwing down the middle is never to land it down the middle, to hit your spot down the middle, but instead to get you ahead in the count, which allows you to do other things, which we can cover now. So the other things that are important when you get ahead in the count, you can start to throw your other pitches that are less likely to be thrown for a strike. So every pitcher, I mean, maybe not every pitcher, but pretty much every pitcher throws their fastball for a strike more than any other pitch because it's straight. So if you throw your fastball for a strike 70% of the time, which is great, you might only throw your curveball for a strike 50% of the time. You might only throw your changeup for a strike, which is your third best pitch maybe 40% of the time. So if your life or the game depended on it and you had to throw a called strike, say it was 3-0 with the bases loaded and the winning run on third base, if you had to throw a strike, you would pick your best commanded pitch, the pitch that you throw for a strike more than any other, which is usually your fastball. And so when you're behind, it kind of forces you to pick pitches that you'll throw for a strike more often, which are more often fastballs. That's good for the hitter and bad for the pitcher. When a pitcher is ahead in the count, he can say, okay, well, I'm 0-2 or I'm 0-1, so I'm ahead. Therefore, I can throw that changeup that's going to be harder for the hitter to hit because they're not expecting a changeup, or the curveball breaks and that's just a harder pitch to hit. I can throw that pitch even though I'm only going to throw it for a called strike 50% of the time or 40% of the time. But I can throw it in this situation because I'm so far ahead in the count that if I miss, I'm still not in any real danger of walking the hitter, and the hitter is more likely to swing at it because they're trying to not fall farther and farther behind the count. And that's what we call expanding the strike zone. And this is another really important concept. So expanding the strike zone means that hitters start to swing at more pitches that are outside the strike zone because they're afraid of taking a called strike. So if it's 0-2 and you as a pitcher throw a pitch right here, the hitter's more likely to swing at that 0-2 because they know the umpire might call that borderline pitch, even if it's a ball, a strike. A hitter might swing at a curveball that's breaking out of the dirt or out of the zone and might be caught here. They might swing at that one more likely on 0-2 because, again, they're afraid of getting called out on strikes. On 2-0 or 3-1 or 3-0, a hitter's going to be much more disciplined. They're only going to want to pick fastballs if they can correctly identify the spin. They're only going to want to swing at pitches that are center cut right down the middle of the plate because they can be picky, because even if a pitcher throws a called strike on 3-1, the hitter still has the count in his favor, and they're not going to be called out on strikes on that pitch. So this balance of who's ahead in the count really determines whether or not the hitter is going to expand the strike zone and start to swing at pitches that are even worse for the hitter to hit. So hopefully this overview of how the count and the size of the plate and margin for error and how all those factors sort of collide to determine what pitch you'll throw as a pitcher, hopefully this overview has been helpful, because this is really the foundation of making smart pitch calls and smart location calls in the strike zone. Too many amateur pitchers make the mistake of when they get a strike, they immediately go to the corner of the plate. What's really more important is using margin for error effectively, and by not always jumping to the corner, but maybe using the outer half of the plate or the outer third of the plate, which gives you a good blend of both a high quality pitch potential and more margin for error so you can get the strike that you need. All right. So if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel. Check out the links in the description below where you'll find my pitching books, my online courses, and other resources for ball players. And share this video with a friend, and I'll see you next time here on my baseball channel.